Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Parallel Barkings. My name is Larry Backer, and I am here with
Ariana Backer, bark, bark.
Bark Bark. And today we have a very special, although
It's
somewhat
always
short,
very
it's
special. It's
always very special. But I like to say, it's we live in the age of the
This is
therapeutic.
timely. This is a
Yeah,
timely.
it's timely, but it's also special because in this therapeutic age in which we live,
Okay.
you're not anything unless you're special. And so we're all always special,
And here is a trophy for you.
but we're extra special today.
Okay.
Because you're right, because we're doing something timely. We're going to be talking about elections.
Elections. Don't forget to vote, everyone, on.
Assuming that you
Oh
hear
no,
this
wait. Actually, you're going to
before,
hear this
yes.
after you voted. I know you are.
Yeah,
So hopefully
yeah.
you voted
Yeah,
on
so hopefully you voted.
the
If
8th.
not, vote next time. But anyway, so we're going to talk about elections. But unlike what you have for those of you in the United States, as this is directed especially to you, unlike much of what you've been hearing for the last several months, we are not going to be talking about particular candidates or particular
Nope.
issues. We leave that entirely to you,
Yeah,
with
that's all
respect to
yours.
which it's all yours. We have no opinion. And even if we had opinions, they're irrelevant because the only opinion that matters when you go to the voting booth is
It's
your own.
yours.
Is your own. So own it, express it, hooray.
Yeah.
But still, the topic of elections is fairly interesting, not just here, but in a lot of countries. And what we want to do today, just very briefly, is to contextualize this thing that has just captured the imagination of and of course, because we're talking about the American midterms, we're going to be focusing on the Americans, but that has captured the American imagination and put it on overdrive ever since the acts of hooligans and bandits on January 4th,
It was
2020.
it was the 6th, okay? I feel like everybody knows.
Yeah. But
Oh, okay. Are you just being really technical here?
I'm just being very technical.
Okay.
Not the hooligan part, but although that's actually
That
the
is
gist
the
of it.
technical term.
That's the technical term, are hooligans, bandits, and lawbreakers. But
Yes.
That's all they were. But anyway, so we're going to talk about elections because this is a thing that we want to talk about, and one of right, and one of
Because
the
we want to.
because we want to, because it's important, and perhaps maybe it's important to understand what elections are in the as a core principle of, and the defining, really the defining premise of liberal democracy, which is what everyone is talking about. We tend to use all of these terms as fetishes. That is, or the way you use it to cast spells. So
Like
people
feet.
will use, and people will use these terms all the time. They'll just fling them out like magical words: elections, liberal democracy, voting, blah 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 blah. And the words really tend to be decontextualized, and they tend to be significantly separated from both the theory and an understanding of what it is exactly that you're getting as a people when you have a liberal democratic system grounded in elections, and what you're not getting in a democracy that is founded or expressed through elections. So when we look at this, and I'm just going to go on for a tiny bit, and then
When he says tiny bit, everyone
well,
knows.
break in when you want. Break in when you want. All right. All right.
Okay, I'll get a minute.
So like everything else, within a liberal democratic system, liberal democracy has to be performed in some way. And by performed, I mean there has to be some action that materializes liberal democracy. Otherwise, it's just two words that are completely empty of meaning.
Well, and that's because otherwise the populace has no idea what's going on.
Well, the populace may still not have any idea what's going on, but they
Well,
will still participate and
they have to be
perform.
convinced. They have to be convinced they know what's going on, and that's what the performance is for.
If you say so. but we're going to perform liberal democracy. And the way you perform liberal democracy is through the act of election, right? So elections become central to liberal democracy because it serves as a periodic affirmation of the continuing legitimacy of the government into which we insert our representatives. And at the same time, it's the reaffirmation with every election of the delegation of popular authority from the people to the state apparatus into which these people are inserted. And
we're very liturgical.
Right. Well, we are in a sense. So when we do elections, what we're doing is two things, but both of them it's a double affirmation. And that's what makes liberal democracy work. It's this constant double affirmation that keeps the system legitimate. The first is the affirmation of the legitimacy of the government itself. And then the second with the election is the affirmation of the delegation of popular sovereignty, because remember, in an election, all power stems from the people, but the people don't exercise power. The people exercise power only through its government.
Their representatives or
no, it's government, and that the government is then populated with the representatives of the people. So
I see.
Elections are then tied to two things. One is the institutions remain legitimate, and two, that one performs the act of populating those institutions with the representatives of popular sovereign authority. And so that's what we're doing. So elections are these affirmations and involving insertions of individuals who are representative. They aren't supposed to be themselves, although it's hard to tell that with the sort of hysterics that tend to follow American elections. This is nothing new. We started our hysterics with the Adams-Jefferson election of 1800, so it's as old as a republic. It's just every age has its own special brand of hysteria. Ours tends to be somewhat over the top, and that may be a function of too much reality TV, but who knows? But I'm not a psychiatrist.
It might just seem that way because we're living it.
Well, that's true. That's true. And our great-great-great-grandchildren will find this as cute as we find what passed for the hysterics of the election of 1800. So anyway, so it's this double affirmation and insertion, and it represents, in a sense, the essence of democratic experience in a liberal democracy, and one that's episodic. That is, it occurs with a regularity and a frequency. So it has to be, this double reaffirmation occurs periodically, but it starts and it stops with the casting of a vote. Right? That's the performance of liberal democracy when you get down to its essence. And so it then follows that the preservation of the system has to be focused on something, and it's got to be focused on the election itself, on the protection of the legitimacy of the performance of the election, right? And so we spend how many hundreds of thousands of hours about the election system itself? Are the Chinese or the Russians coming in and messing with our electronic forms of election? Are hooligans within this country somehow corrupting either paper ballots or non-paper ballots? Do we have hordes of people who can testify to the proper conduct of elections at localities? That's a key element, and it's not to be understated. If, in fact, the entirety of the liberal democratic system is grounded in a single act, I vote, then it necessarily follows that the focus, the hyper focus of legitimacy has to be on the protection of the performance of the election itself. But even more importantly, and this is what Mr. Trump taught us, well, I mean, there he is. Although it's not just Mr. Trump, it's as I'm going to explain in a second, Mr. Nixon in 1960 and Mr. Gore and Mr. Gore in 2000. The second and most important consequence is that not only do we have to protect the legitimacy of the performance of the election itself, but we have to insist on the performance of allegiance to the operation of elections by those who stand for election and the factions, the political factions, we call them political parties, but they're just factions, in which they declare an allegiance, right? And so these two things have to happen. You have to have confidence in the legitimacy of the election, and
Well, that's why everybody was freaking out.
Right.
Well, that's why the media was like,
that's what right. But other people were freaking out too, including Mr. Trump. But who cares? We only care because everyone else seemed to care. But
the integrity of democracy is crumbling because the voting structure is no longer legitimate.
Well, but that's it. But that's the key issue.
And that seems.
But that's why he presses the button. But that's why he presses the button. That's the only button you're going to press that's going to make everyone jump, and legitimately so, because if in fact we reduce the entirety of our system.
But why are we doing that?
Because we've been doing this since year zero. If you don't like it, change the Constitution and change the basic premise of liberal democracy. We have to understand it. And so it makes perfect sense, right? But the problem has been not just, do we have full, free, fair elections protected from corruption from inside or outside? But the other part that we've always tended to underplay, and that has now really burst right onto the scene, which is what is distorting the election cycles for the last 20 or so years, is that we also expect those who run to perform, this is the additional performance, to perform their allegiance to this system by accepting the result of the election, not just passively, but affirmatively, right? That declaration has to be absolutely central to this. Everything else is politics, but you got to do it.
And they've used the word precedent. They have used the word precedent.
They can use whatever words they want. I mean, I can use, it's another fetish object. I can use the word, what is it? Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Please do.
As well. It doesn't really matter. They're using a fetish word to get people to jump, but that's essentially it. And that's politics. But what we've seen in the modern era, certainly since 1960, is an erosion of this second part in an even more precipitous way, I think, than we saw the challenges to the legitimacy of the election itself. And let me explain both for like 2 seconds. What we saw was if we use 1960 as a baseline, there were all kinds of rumors. It's never been proven, but in part because of the significant force of the application of the notion of affirmation of result by the loser, in this case, Mr. Nixon. In 1960, there was all kinds of talk about how Mr. Nixon lost because the dead appeared to vote in copious numbers in Illinois.
It happens.
It happens, and Illinois is a magical state where the dead come to life on election day. God bless them. And if not God, then whoever it is animating them, maybe it's World War Z, and
or Infinity Stones, who knows?
Whatever it is. But anyway, at that point, he sucked it up and he conceded defeat. He ultimately became president, and that's the deal, sort of. He never forgot, but he conceded, and the Republic moved on. By 2000, now we move from Illinois and rumor to litigation. Mr. Gore, on a key state that might have decided Florida and the Chads and all of this, for those of you who are old enough to remember this, that was contested, right? There was no immediate affirmation. That was contested, but it was contested in a legal process, and there was ultimately a concession when the Supreme Court said, sorry. Whether you agreed with the Supreme Court or not, and to this day, there are many people who believe that that's a schlock decision, but they affirmed the legitimacy of the decision, and by implication, they then affirmed reluctantly the results of the election that brought the younger Bush into power.
Yep.
By 2020, we neither have sucking up, nor do we have a significant and an important litigation. What we have is a socio-political phenomena which occurs between November and today, where politics becomes the politics of rejectionism and non-affirmation, which has caused a bit of instability, to put it mildly, a bit of instability in the Republic, mostly because by doing that, you've now broken it, clearly a weekend, but you've broken one of the iron rules of the stability of a liberal democratic system grounded in this singular act.
Right.
Now, there's one other little point. Understanding that that's a singular act and that we have this double affirmation, we also accept the fact that elections are not perfect and that there will be messiness and they may not be completely accurate. And in close elections, that may have a significant result, but we take a deep breath, we suck it up, because almost invariably, at some point, the party that wins by a hair's breadth in a messy election that may have gone the other way if it had been perfectly done, will wind up being on the losing end of the next election. And so at some point, it'll all add up. So we do a couple of things. We accept the ultimate messiness of the election process, and we expect this affirmation. One of them has been eroded, and then the attack on the process of the on the election process itself now becomes grounded in this absolutely impossible search for electoral process perfection, which is impossible, which means that you can never, ever, ever be absolutely sure that the election was 1,000% accurate. And now you have knocked the struts out of not one, but two of the key elements in the stability of a liberal democratic system: the faith in the electoral process itself is legitimate, understanding that it is not perfect, but striving towards it and doing one's best to prevent obvious or significant corruption, and the obligation of the losing party to affirm allegiance to the system by conceding, even in cases where the election process was, to put it euphemistically, messy. And that's the kind of system that we wind up, or that's the kind of mess that we wind up in now. The Americans have become somewhat more used to much more cynically weaponizing both of these key elements.
Yeah, without thinking about the consequences of what will happen.
Well, that's right. And to some extent, the political classes have now reverted from being relatively adult, even if it's somewhat slimy, to being toddlers who are completely slimy. And what you wind up doing is not just playing with whether Joe or Mary wins an election that they may lose 2 to 4 to 6 years later, depending on the office, to one in which you're playing with the legitimacy of the republic itself. And everyone is running around like Cassandras, warning that if in fact the election doesn't go their way, then the republic is a sham, or if you vote for the other party, then what you're doing is bringing in neo-fascist totalitarianism. And so rather than deal with the usual focus of an election, every election represents an existential contest, because we are no longer sure of, or we have weaponized the possibility of both attacking the legitimacy of the process itself, because we have an unreasonable expectation of perfection in a system that was never meant to be. And we use the threat of non-affirming
Hmm.
the system itself by conceding even especially a close election. And that is what essentially brings us to the sort of madness or the aberrational position that we're in now. And it's aberrational not because politics isn't messy and not because politicians haven't called each other the spawn of Satan, and therefore you have to vote for them since the beginning of the Republic, but because now what they're doing more than in a lot of other periods is every election now requires us to be wary of and to cause people to panic about the stability of the system itself. And that in itself creates an instability, which in this republic, and certainly over the looking back, certainly over the last century or so, is highly, highly dangerous to the continued stability of whatever it is you conceive of this republic. And again, because of the way in which they undermine the key struts that supports liberal democratic action.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very frustrating that individuals can't really do much of anything to stop this from happening. I mean, there's really not what you can do you can't write to your local representative and say, stop messing around with the voting system, stop going whichever way you feel like it on whichever day.
Right.
You can't do that. It's not like the people have any sway. We just vote and then see what the representatives or the people in Congress feel like.
Right, but then we get to a worse point, which is something that is significantly aberrational, and that is if in fact we begin to weaponize the core premises of liberal democracy, we also make it possible to do precisely what we're afraid of to do, and that is to move the republic away from principles of liberal democracy to one of majority party dictatorship, and I'll explain.
Well, or something different. It doesn't necessarily.
No. It's going to be majority party dictatorship, and the reason for that is very simple. And one begins to see the edges of that in the current election cycle. And I'm not going to name a particular party. This isn't a finger pointing to any one of the two dominant parties. So I'm going to say,
wouldn't that be an oligarchy? No, maybe not.
Party X accuses Party Y of undermining the republic by
weird. I've never heard that before.
Right, because their prior leader of Party Y refused to affirm that person's loss.
Yeah.
That then turns into a suggestion that every member of Party Y in that context must be a member of a political party that has betrayed the republic. And if you vote for anyone in Party Y, then you are also complicit in undermining the republic. So it's not just that Party X is for raising taxes to promote social welfare programs, and Party Y is the party of the
like
rich.
Hydra versus Shield. I've been watching a lot of Marvel.
So you've not only upped the ante, but you begin to engage in a hysterical politics of treason, and that also then tends to undermine I'm not going to say the republic, but it tends to undermine the foundational struts of liberal democracy, and that's something that both parties have. To some extent, in some cases, among some of its members, its consultants, its propaganda departments, and whoever it is who's managing all of these things, sometimes succumbs to the temptation of doing that. If you vote for, and this isn't just the people of Party Y calling the people of Party X communists. that's just standard issue politics of exaggeration. It's when you say that, in fact, voting for people from party Y or Q or Z is effectively the royal road to a revolution and the end of liberal democracy. So you're voting for people who are revolutionaries or traitors, and at that point, the system begins to operate in a very different way. So hopefully, the Republic will get over this, but part of it, I think, may require the population to again be reminded of what I call liberal democratic first principles, just to remember what's the issue. And the issue isn't whether one likes or despises a particular economic, social, or cultural, political position of a faction. That's absolutely fair game. The issue becomes whether one understands and holds these factions to the basic rules that promotes the stability of the system. And that is, if we put all of our eggs in the performance of liberal democracy through a vote, after which we don't really care what the masses do. They've done their job in
Their civic duty.
Democracy. Yeah, and that's it. And then the rest of it is lobbying and whatever. That's a different podcast about participatory versus electoral democratic theory, endogenous or exogenous democracy. We're not going there. But to understand that indeed the population really does have to hold its representatives not to a state of toddler weaponization, which is what they're doing. You've got a bunch of toddlers who are more than happy to break the house in order to advance their own sadly personal or factional strategic interests, which makes them toddlers rather than adults, for which we'll suffer. But to remind them that indeed that requires them to be scrupulous in both understanding the need to preserve the process of election with the understanding that elections are never going to be perfect, and that sometimes things are messy, but that's tolerable. And then the question is how much mess. And then the other is to absolutely and positively demand the reaffirmation of losers in the system itself. In the absence of that, we got what we have.
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to expect more of the latter based on what we've seen so far. The people who are in office right now seem more concerned with their own personal
Agendas.
Yes, their own personal agendas than anything having to do with the country or its direction.
Well, I have no opinion about that. And
I'm happy to give mine anytime,
I know,
any place, anywhere.
You know, I think that people ought to strongly embrace whatever view that they wind up having with respect to this, but that those views, and my sense has always been that view is best developed, expressed, and then not just articulated, but put into practice with as much information and in as thoughtful a way as possible. And wherever you wind up will be good as long as you have the considered basis for making a choice grounded in your values, but on the basis of more rather than less information. And that's where we are. I am always hopeful that in a country that is approaching 400 million people, that at some point somehow there will be enough reasonable-minded adults whose primary fidelity is to the core principles of the Republic, who will stand up and do their duty, that in fact we will once again be able to reclaim, again, even if for a limited time, even a limited time is good, we will be able to reclaim a space of politics within a stable and in a prosperous country. But with that, I hope you all voted. I hope you're happy with your performance. And let's see what happens next. Woof,
Yeah.
woof.
Hold on to your butts, everyone. It'll be a wild ride. See you
It
next
certainly has
time.
been. Bye.
Bye.